Montana Territory. May 1883, rain hammered the roof of the stagecoach like it meant to wash the world clean. Rosalind Dearing clutched the tattered letter in her lap, its edges softened by the tremble of her fingers and the wear of 1,000 rereads. Her corset pinched her ribs, her boots ached, and still she sat straight, eyes locked on the gray horizon beyond the window. They were nearly there. She had crossed nearly 1,000 miles for a future she had only dared to dream about in ink and hope. The letter had said honest work, a quiet home, and a man who will treat you kindly. It was signed by Samuel Thatcher, cattleman out of Sweet Creek, Montana Territory, widower, no children, 34, seeking companionship and marriage. His words had been simple, direct, and full of decency. After what she had survived in Ohio, that had been enough. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in the muddy street of Sweet Creek. Rosalind tucked the letter away and stepped into the cold air with her bag in hand. The town was small, 3 streets, a church steeple, a schoolhouse half-painted, and a hitching post where a tall man waited beside a drenched sorrel gelding. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a dark coat patched at the elbows. His face was sun-worn, jaw strong, and when his eyes met Rosalind's, something in them steadied. It was not surprise or longing, but recognition. Like she was not just expected, but already part of the place. "You must be Miss Dearing," he said, voice low and solid like the land around him. "Rosalind," she corrected gently, her hands tightening on the handle of her bag. He nodded. "Samuel Thatcher. Sorry for the rain, it does not usually come down like this in May." She gave a small laugh, not because it was funny, but because it felt good to stand in front of someone who sounded like he meant what he said. He reached for her bag. "Let me carry that. My wagon's just down the street. We'll get you out of this weather." She hesitated, and then let him take it. The ride to his ranch was slow, the wagon wheels slipping in the mud, but Samuel did not rush. He kept glancing over, checking if she was cold, uncomfortable, needing anything. Rosalind had never been around a man who watched her like that, not possessive or guarded. "Just aware, present. You live out here alone?" she asked, her voice quiet under the steady beat of rain on the canvas overhead. He hesitated. "Not exactly." Her heart tightened. "I have 2 children. They're not mine by blood, their mother. She was my late brother's wife, died 3 years ago. He passed the year after. I took the children in, Peter and Polly. They're 10 and 7. Rosalind blinked, surprised but not angry. "You did not mention them in your letter." "I meant to, I just worried it might turn you away." She looked at him then, really looked. His jaw was tight with worry, his hands tense on the reins. But he had not lied. He had told the truth now when it counted most. "It does not turn me away," she said. He looked at her and the air shifted between them. When they reached the ranch house, it was well kept and warm inside. The children peeked from the stairs, Polly with 2 braids and wide eyes, Peter with a suspicious frown and arms crossed. Rosalind knelt down slowly, her dress damp at the hem. "Hello there," she said softly. "I am Rosalind." Peter looked at Samuel. "Is she staying?" Samuel nodded. "She is." Polly stepped forward and took Rosalind's hand. "You smell like soap. Are you going to be nice?" Rosalind smiled. "I will try my very best." After supper, the children were sent to bed. Rosalind sat by the fire, drying her boots while Samuel poured 2 mugs of coffee. "I know this is not what you expected," he said, handing her one. "Or maybe it is worse than you hoped for." "It is not worse," she said quietly. "It is just different, but I do not mind it." He sat across from her. The firelight made his face softer. There was a long silence between them, but not an awkward one. Just the kind that filled the space when words were not needed yet. "Why did you write to me, Samuel?" she asked finally. He looked down into his coffee. "I needed someone who would not run. Someone who could stand with me." raise 2 children with me, and maybe someone who could love me in time. Rosalind's throat tightened. She had spent years surviving losing her parents to sickness, nearly marrying a man who broke her trust, working herself raw as a seamstress in Cincinnati. And now here, in the middle of wild Montana, a man she had never met was offering her all the things she never let herself wish for. "I came here because I wanted to believe someone like you could exist," she said. He met her eyes. "Do I?" "Yes," she whispered. Outside, the rain began to ease. Inside, the fire crackled and something slow and warm began to build between them. Rosalind held the tattered letter in her lap, but her eyes were on the man across from her. The man who had written it, and for the first time in years, she felt like maybe her story was not ending. Maybe it was just beginning. Rosalind woke before dawn, the quiet hush of the house settling around her like a quilt still warm from sleep. The room Samuel had given her was simple, a narrow bed with a quilt stitched in faded reds and browns, a washstand with a cracked basin, and a single window that looked east toward the rise of the hills. She had not expected comfort, but there was something steadying in the plainness, something honest. She dressed quietly and stepped into the hallway, her slippered feet making no sound on the worn floorboards. The door to the children's room was closed, and a faint clatter came from downstairs. She followed it to the kitchen, where Samuel was setting a pot on the stove, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow and his hair still damp from an earlier wash. "You sleep all right?" he asked without turning. "Well enough," she said, stepping closer. "Is there something I can do?" He handed her a knife and motioned to the table where 3 small potatoes waited. "You peel. I'll handle the rest." She took the knife without question, sat, and began working, the blade scraping clean lines through the skin. The silence between them grew companionable, filled only by the soft hiss of the fire and the hollow thud of wood against iron. After a while, Samuel leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "I forgot to ask how long you were a seamstress." She glanced up. 7 years. "Since I was 18. He nodded, thoughtful. "You like it?" "I like the quiet of it, the rhythm, but it was hard on my eyes." She set a peeled potato aside. "I never thought much beyond it, not until your letter." Samuel's gaze lingered on her, unreadable. "You ever live outside a city?" "Never." She smiled faintly. "But I've imagined it. The way morning smells when it comes off trees instead of chimney smoke. The way people speak slower, like their words don't have to hurry anywhere." He chuckled, and it was a low, warm sound. "You'll find some of us still hurry, especially come branding season. Do your cattle graze far from here? 2 miles south. I keep them near for now. Easier with the children." Rosalind looked out the small window above the sink. Pale gold light was just beginning to touch the edge of the trees. "Do they help with the chores?" Peter tries to act older than he is. "Polly mostly sings to the chickens." She laughed softly. "I'd like to see that." "You will." He moved to pour 2 mugs of coffee, setting one before her. "We've got time." They ate quietly when the children came down, still blinking the sleep from their eyes. Peter gave Rosalind a wary glance but said nothing. Polly slid onto the bench beside her and reached for a biscuit. After breakfast, Samuel stood and reached for his coat. "I'll check the north fence line. Shouldn't be long." Peter jumped up. "Can I come?" Samuel hesitated. "You've got school today." Peter's shoulders dropped. "I hate that place." "Doesn't matter. You're going." The boy scowled but didn't argue. Samuel turned to Rosalind. "Can you walk them there?" "It's just past the general store. You'll see the flag." She nodded. "Of course." He met her eyes as if something more passed between them than the simple task. Then he stepped out into the morning and the door shut behind him. Rosalind helped the children gather their things, Peter's slate and Polly's little cloth satchel, and together they stepped into the street. The town looked different in daylight. A woman swept her porch, a man led a mule past the smithy, and a dog barked somewhere near the mercantile. Polly skipped ahead, humming to herself while Peter dragged his boots through the dust. "You miss your parents?" Rosalind asked gently, not looking at him. Peter's jaw tensed. "They're gone, that's all." She didn't press. Instead, she watched as Polly ran her fingers along the picket fence outside the schoolhouse, her braid bouncing. Once the children disappeared inside, Rosalind found herself lingering near the general store. The shelves inside were lined with glass jars, bolts of cloth, and tools. Behind the counter stood a broad woman with a kerchief tied over her hair. "You're the new bride," the woman said, her tone more curious than unkind. "Rosalind Thatcher," she replied. The woman's eyebrows rose. "Took his name already, I plan to." "Well," she wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm Mabel. If you need sugar or salt or someone to tell you who to mind and who to ignore, I'm your woman." Rosalind smiled. "I might take you up on that." Outside, the sky stretched wide and clean, and a breeze stirred the dust along the road. She walked slowly back toward the ranch, her shoes already picking up grit. The land smelled of pine and thawed earth, and every step felt like something giving way inside her, like a door she hadn't known was shut had quietly swung open. When she reached the house, she found a stack of folded linens on her bed and a note in Samuel's hand beside them. "Thought you might want these. The attic's warmest in the afternoon if you want a place to think." As she touched the paper, the corners of her mouth lifting. Then she carried the linens to the wash basin, filled it with water, and began the slow work of scrubbing. The rhythm of her hands in the cloth soothed her, the scent of lye and cotton rising in the quiet. She did not know yet what kind of love might grow here. But already, it felt like the soil had been turned, the first seeds pressed into earth that waited only for time. Rosalind stood at the edge of the corral, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her skirt dusted with straw and her palms red from the rake. A warm wind tugged strands of hair loose from her bun as she watched Polly dump a tin pail of feed into the trough with both arms. The girl's dress hung uneven off one shoulder, and her boots were 2 sizes too large, but she moved with the purpose of someone who'd never been told to be careful. "Should I be worried about her?" Rosalind asked. Behind her, Samuel leaned against the fence post, the brim of his hat tipped low against the sun. "Only if you dislike honesty. She'll tell you when she's tired of you. She's already told me she likes my voice better than her schoolteacher's. She told Miss Weaver she sounded like a wasp stuck in a jar." He said it without apology, but the twitch at the corner of his mouth gave something away. Rosalind turned back to the pasture. "How long do you plan to keep Peter in town school?" "As long as he'll go without bolting through the back door." He stepped closer, resting his arms on the top rail. "He's restless, wants to prove he can do a man's work." "I remember what that feels like. You were like him. Worse. Grew up in Kansas. Tornado flattened our house when I was 13. After that, I figured if a wind could take everything, I might as well not get too attached. Took me years to stop running from things." Rosalind brushed hay from her skirt. "What made you stop?" He glanced at her, then out toward the hills. "My brother's death. Those children needed someone who wouldn't leave." She was quiet a moment. "Then, was it hard stepping into that role?" He didn't answer right away. "It was lonely. But hard and lonely aren't the same." She nodded, folding that answer away. Polly was now seated in the dirt beside the trough, humming tunelessly and poking at something with a stick. Samuel pushed off the fence. "I should check the south pasture. Fence there's been leaning. You all right to manage here?" "I can manage," she said. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small tin. "If the mare's still favoring her leg, rub this on her hock." Birch oil and tallow. She won't like it, but it helps. Rosalind took the tin. Their fingers brushed, brief, but enough to pull her breath tighter in her chest. He stepped back. "I'll be back before supper." She watched him cross the yard, mount his gelding, and ride out without looking back. She didn't need him to. Something in her already knew he would return. Inside, the house was cooler. She boiled water for the laundry, poured it into the basin, and carried the tin of birch salve out to the barn. The mare stamped at her approach, but Rosalind kept her voice low, her movements even. She worked the ointment into the swollen joint, careful not to flinch when the horse shifted. "You're stubborn," she murmured, "but I've met worse." Later, she sat with Polly beneath the cottonwood, mending one of Peter's socks while the girl practiced tying knots in a length of twine. "Do you know how to make buttons?" Polly asked. "Some." "Why, your coat's missing one." Rosalind looked down. The girl was right. "I'll fix it," she said. Polly twisted the twine around her fingers. "Did you love someone before Uncle Sam?" Rosalind's needle paused. "I thought I did once. But I was wrong." The girl looked up solemn. "Will you stay?" "I plan to." "That's not the same." Rosalind folded the sock and set it in her lap. "No, I suppose it isn't." That evening, Samuel returned with sweat along his brow and a fresh tear in his shirt sleeve. Rosalind met him at the gate with a tin basin of water and a clean cloth, fence standing, for now. He dipped his hands into the basin, then rubbed his neck with the cloth. "You get that salve on the mare." "She didn't bite me, so I take that as a win." He laughed, low and surprised. "You settling in?" "I'm trying. It's not what I knew before, but it feels possible here." He studied her, serious again. "That what you're looking for, possible?" "No." She stepped closer. "I'm looking for something worth choosing, every day. Even when it's hard." He didn't reach for her, didn't speak. But the way he looked at her, quiet, steady, without expectation, felt more intimate than any touch. Inside, the children were finishing supper. Peter had washed his face, though a smear of dirt still clung to his ear. Polly was plaiting her napkin into a braid. Rosalind took her seat across from Samuel. Everything in her life before had felt like waiting. This was the beginning of something lived, not perfect, not easy, but rooted, real. And she knew, sitting there in the home that was slowly becoming hers, she would choose it again tomorrow. The morning sun cut across the eastern ridge like a blade, sharp and golden. Rosalind stood at the edge of the clothesline, pinning a wet shirt by its shoulders, her fingers stiff with cold that hadn't yet lifted from the grass. Her breath curled from her lips as she worked, and the scent of wood smoke drifted from the chimney behind her. Samuel had already ridden out before dawn. He'd left his plate half full at breakfast, boots tracking mud across the floor as he fetched his saddlebag without a word. Something had settled heavy in him since yesterday, though he hadn't said what it was. Rosalind hadn't asked. She finished the laundry and returned to the house. Polly was seated at the table, elbows tucked in, tongue between her teeth as she copied letters into her slate. Peter leaned against the window frame, watching the yard like he expected something to come out of the barn. Rosalind poured hot water into a tin cup and set it beside him. "You feeling all right?" He nodded without looking away. "He's been gone longer than usual. He'll come back. He always does. But sometimes he comes back different." Rosalind pulled out a chair. "What do you mean?" Peter shrugged, but his jaw was tight. "He tries to hide it, but I can tell when he's remembering things." She didn't press. The boy carried his thoughts like old tools too familiar to be set down. When the door finally opened near midday, Samuel stepped in with his coat dusted in burrs and his knuckles scraped raw. His eyes flicked across the room, pausing at each of them before he shut the door behind him. Polly looked up. "Did something happen?" "No," he said. "Then, yes." Rosalind rose. "What is it?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded telegram slip, the edges creased with sweat and dirt. "It's from the land office. There's a claim dispute someone's trying to stake over the south pasture." Peter's fists curled. "Do they have right to it?" Rosalind asked. "No," Samuel said, voice low. "But proving that'll mean riding into Helena, gathering the original deed, and sitting through hours of talk with men who don't know or care what that land feeds." Rosalind looked toward the window. The sky was already pale with the wash of late-day light. "When will you go?" "Tomorrow, if I can get the fence line checked today." "I'll ride with you," Peter said. "No," Samuel answered. "You need to stay." Peter stepped forward. "I'm not a child." "You are," Samuel said, gently but firm. "And you're needed here." Peter's eyes flashed, but he didn't argue. He turned and walked out, the door slapping behind him. Samuel exhaled, running a hand over his face. "I didn't want this to land on you." "It hasn't," Rosalind said. "It's just part of the life we're building." He looked over at her, something careful moving behind his eyes. "I forget sometimes that you didn't grow up near this kind of land, that you stepped into all of it at once. I'm not afraid of it, I know." His voice softened. "That's what makes me afraid." She crossed the room and stood close enough to smell the dust on his coat. "I came here because I wanted something real. I don't expect that to be easy." His shoulders eased, but he didn't touch her. Instead, he stepped around her and poured himself a cup of water, drinking it slowly before speaking again. "My father was like Peter. Anger just under the skin. He never stayed in one place long. I think Peter remembers that more than he says." "You're not your father." "No," he said. "But the boy doesn't know that yet." That night, after the children were asleep, Rosalind sat by the hearth, darning a tear in Polly's hem under the flicker of lamplight. Samuel came in from the barn with mud on his cuffs and a tired set to his walk. He didn't speak at first, just stood by the fire and stared into the flames. "I was thinking," he said at last, "about what you said, that you came here looking for something real." Rosalind didn't look up from her stitching. "Yes, I want to be that for you. Even when I don't know how." She set the fabric down. "You already are, we just haven't learned the shape of it yet." He turned toward her. "When I come back from Helena, I'd like to speak with Reverend Moore. Set a date." Her heart paused in her chest, then steadied. "I'd like that," he nodded, quiet. "I'll take the early train, should be back inside a week." She rose and crossed to him, resting her hand briefly over his. He didn't pull away. Instead, he folded his fingers around hers, rough and warm. There were no grand declarations. Just a quiet moment held between them like a promise. Outside, the wind picked up over the hills, but inside the house, everything held. The train returned from Helena 2 days later than planned, slowed by a rockslide near the pass. Samuel stepped off the platform with dust on his collar and a folded sheaf of papers tucked beneath his arm. His boots were worn through at the toes. He hadn't written ahead. He didn't need to. If she was who he believed she was, she'd be there. She was. Rosalind stood near the edge of the platform, her coat buttoned high and her eyes focused on the line of passengers. When she saw him, she didn't wave or call out. She just waited steady until he reached her. "Did you win?" she asked. His voice was hoarse from travel. "We did." She reached for his hand. "Good." He didn't speak again until they reached the wagon. The registrar had questions. They always do, but the deed was clean. "It's ours, proper and final." Rosalind nodded, brushing a leaf from the seat beside her. "Peter's been fixing the gate in the east pasture. Said it was crooked." "It was." He used a plumb line. "Said you taught him that last winter." Samuel glanced at her, the corner of his mouth pulling faintly. "He remembers more than I think." They rode back in quiet, the kind that carried no tension, only rest. The land was greening early, and the cottonwoods along the creek were beginning to leaf out. By the time the ranch house came into view, the sun was low behind the ridge, casting the fields in long gold. Inside, the children were at the table, Polly with her face smudged in flour and Peter carving something small from pine with a whittling knife. Neither looked up right away, as if they'd been told not to make a fuss. Samuel set his papers on the shelf by the door. "I brought back licorice sticks." Polly dropped her spoon and ran to him. Peter stood slower, but his face had already softened. After supper, while the children gathered their things for school, Rosalind stepped out to the porch with a jar of tea and 2 cups. Samuel followed, the screen door creaking shut behind him. "You need rest," she said, pouring for both of them. "I'll sleep when the fences are done." She handed him a cup. "You keep saying that, but the fences are never done." He sat beside her, stretching his legs out. "You're not wrong." She leaned back, eyes on the sky where the stars had begun to show. "Do you still want to talk to Reverend Moore?" His hand brushed hers on the rail. "I do." "Then we should do it before the month's out." The children asked if they'll have to wear shoes. He laughed low in his chest. "They'll survive one day of discomfort." Rosalind sipped her tea. "I don't want a big gathering." "Neither do I. Just the 4 of us. And Mabel, maybe. She said she's got a white ribbon she's been saving for a bride worth the cloth." Samuel shook his head. "She say that." She made it sound like a threat. They sat like that until the night cooled the boards beneath their feet. Then he turned toward her, slow, deliberate. "I never thought I'd find someone who could stand beside me the way you do. I don't say things easy, Rosalind, but I know this. I want you with me, not just here, but in every part of it." She didn't answer with words. Her hand folded over his, palm to palm, and the quiet between them deepened into something permanent. They married 3 weeks later under the cottonwoods behind the house. Reverend Moore read from a small, cracked Bible while Polly picked wild columbine and Peter stood stiff in a clean shirt. Mabel brought a pie and 3 jars of pickled beets and cried harder than anyone expected. They didn't leave town or hire help. There was no need. The ranch was their life, and they worked it side by side. Rosalind taught Polly how to sew a straight hem and how to hold her tongue with strangers who didn't understand her. Peter outgrew his boots twice in 1 year. He asked Samuel to show him how to break a colt, and Samuel did, without a word about the boy's hands being too small. In the summer, they built a smokehouse. In the fall, they put in a second garden bed. Rosalind planted her mother's favorite herbs beside the kitchen window and sang to them when no one was listening. Samuel carved a cradle from cedar and gave it to her with no explanation. She understood before he could explain. When their daughter was born the next spring, Polly insisted on naming her after a character in a story she'd half remembered, something about stars and rivers and women who never gave up. They called her Clara. The land stayed hard. There were years with too little rain and others with too much. But they held to each other, and that made the difference. When Peter turned 16, he asked to keep the south pasture. Samuel said yes without hesitation. Sometimes, when the wind rose over the hills and the sky turned the color of metal, Rosalind would reach for Samuel's hand and feel the same quiet certainty she'd felt the day she stepped off the stagecoach. That she belonged. That she was loved, not for who she might become, but for who she already was. And Samuel, who had once believed that duty was the only thing left to him, found that love, when earned honestly, could be its own kind of freedom. They grew old together in the house they built with their hands, surrounded by the lives they'd shaped and the land that had shaped them in return. And nothing was missing. Not a thing.